The room trembled with a hush so sharp it felt like it could cut skin, and every face turned toward the soft wail that rose in the middle of the aisle. Arms tightened around a small bundle as whispers rolled through the guests, building like a storm no one expected. The air thickened when the bride's voice sliced through the ceremony, shaking with fury that surprised even those who knew her well, ordering the disruption to be removed before it ruined everything she had worked for. Heat rushed through the hall as the weight of embarrassment pressed down, and the decision to step away grew heavier with every breath. Yet, just as the exit came into view, a shadow appeared, holding a truth that could change everything and force the day in a direction no one saw coming. What secret returns at the exact moment someone is pushed out? And what happens when the person cast aside becomes the one holding all the power? The hall behind pulsed with murmurs as the weight of the outburst lingered in the air like a stain no one wanted to acknowledge. Each step toward the open doors felt heavier than the last, carrying the sting of knowing the celebration had turned into a spotlight of blame aimed at the wrong place. The cool air brushing in from outside offered a strange comfort, yet it also carried the tremor of uncertainty as distant footsteps approached. There was a familiar pull in that presence, a reminder of memories tucked away, moments left unresolved, and truths never spoken aloud. The shift in atmosphere made it impossible to ignore that something deeper had begun long before the baby's cry, something that had been building in silence, waiting for the right moment to burst through. And as the noise behind softened, the space ahead promised answers wrapped in tension. The quiet between them stretched just long enough to feel deliberate, as if the world paused to give space for what neither of them knew how to say. The faint echoes of the ceremony drifted through the open doors, reminding them both of the celebration unraveling inside, while a different conflict rewound itself here. A mixture of surprise and worry crossed the face before her, stirring memories of older arguments and family rifts that never truly healed. The tension wrapped around them like a thread, pulling tighter with every second, hinting that his sudden appearance was not just coincidence, but a catalyst for something about to surface. The baby's soft whimper broke the silence, grounding the moment in a fragile reality neither could escape. And with that, the distance between past and present collapsed into a single breath. He shifted his weight as if choosing whether to step forward or retreat, but something in the air held him still. The soft fabric of the dress behind her rustled as a few late guests slipped into the hall, unaware of the quiet storm building at the threshold. A cloud moved across the sun outside, dimming the light just enough to deepen the shadows around them and give the moment a somber edge. Familiar tension rose as old questions resurfaced, ones tied to strained promises and broken paths that led him away for far too long. Even without words, the message hung between them, heavy and urgent, signaling that his return carried meaning none of them could ignore. The wedding might have pushed her out, but his arrival hinted at something far bigger than anger over a crying child. A breeze swept in, lifting the edge of her dress and stirring the soft hair on the baby's forehead as the world beyond the hall beckoned with unspoken choices. Inside, music resumed in a forced attempt to smooth over the disruption, but its cheerful notes felt hollow against the tension thickening near the entrance. His eyes carried a mixture of regret and urgency, revealing they were not meeting by chance, but by design shaped long before this day. The shifting light made him look both familiar and changed, as if the years away had carved stories he was still learning how to hold. The baby stirred again, drawing his gaze and softening the rigid line of his shoulders. In that fleeting moment, she sensed that leaving wasn't the end of the chaos, but the first step into a deeper storm waiting to unfold. The quiet outside the hall thickened as the music inside tried to mask the earlier chaos, creating a strange divide between worlds that no longer felt connected. The tension between the returning presence and the path she had been forced onto settled like a weight across the narrow space, urging a choice she never expected to make today. The faint breeze carried the scent of cut flowers, drifting from the ceremony, mixing oddly with the sharp edge of unfinished family wounds that pulsed beneath the surface. Each heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the muffled vows being repeated inside as the realization grew that the day's disruption had peeled back a truth long buried. The moment stretched, urging her forward, while warning her of the storm his arrival promised. Yet even as hesitation flickered, something in his gaze hinted that turning away now could unravel everything further. A swirl of voices drifted from deeper inside the venue, signaling that the ceremony continued without them. Yet the weight of the moment outside pressed harder than anything happening in the hall. The air felt still enough to expose every unspoken history between the two, standing on opposite sides of a fragile reunion, pushing memories into the space they struggled to fill with words. The past clung to the edges of the scene, reminding them of promises once made and broken, and the heavy truth that neither escape nor distance had truly settled old wounds. Her breath trembled as conflicting instincts pulled at her, urging her to protect the peace she had fought hard to build, while knowing that this encounter was no coincidence. The tension curled into her chest, signaling that whatever came next would shift the day far more than a crying child ever could. A distant cheer from the hall rose abruptly, as though the crowd was desperate to reclaim joy. Yet the sound only emphasized how fractured the day had become. The shifting light outside painted subtle patterns across the edge of her dress, while the presence before her seemed weighed down by years of silence finally coming apart at the seams. The air tightened as the moment forced them to confront the unraveling threads of choices made under pressure, regrets left unspoken, and the quiet guilt that neither had dared face. The baby's soft breathing offered the only calm in the tension, grounding the scene in fragile innocence that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing around them. And as a faint tremor passed through the air, it became clear that the return looming before her was not simply an unexpected visit, but a catalyst that threatened to pull hidden truths straight into the open. The wind shifted just enough to brush past them, carrying faint laughter from the reception area, a stark contrast to the undercurrent of unease building at the threshold. The atmosphere thickened as long-muted tension stretched across the small distance between them, reminding her how unresolved decisions from years ago still clung to every shared breath. Shadows lengthened along the floor where their paths crossed, subtly binding the moment with a weight hinting that the wedding's troubles were only the surface of something far more complex. A flicker of uncertainty moved across his features, exposing the cost of his time away and the truth he struggled to voice. Her grip tightened instinctively, protective and uncertain all at once. It was clear that whatever secrets had been carried to this doorway were no longer content to remain buried beneath the celebration unfolding behind them. A quiet moment settled over them, the world narrowing to the narrow strip of space where tension and fate collided beneath the doorway's arch. The hum of music and distant chatter from inside felt strangely hollow, as the weight of imminent revelation loomed heavier than any celebration note could disguise. His eyes held a silent urgency, as though carrying a message shaped by years of absence and choices that could no longer be hidden. The shifting light painted his expression with a mix of regret and determination, suggesting that the truth he carried was intertwined with the chaos that had pushed her from the hall. She felt the air change, a subtle signal that the next words spoken between them would shift the day's path irrevocably. And in that stillness, the soft stir of the baby offered the only comfort in a moment thick with dread and unfinished history. The music inside swelled again, desperate to mask the fractures spreading through the day. Yet every note only sharpened the strain, waiting in the space between them. The tension pressed in like a tide, urging a confrontation neither had prepared for, as the quiet outside the doorway grew heavier with truths that could no longer stay hidden. A faint tremor pulsed through the air as the weight of the past pulled closer, wrapping around the moment with the reminder that running from pain never erased its shadow. The breeze brushed against her skin, carrying lingering traces of flowers and perfume from the celebration that no longer felt like it belonged to either of them. A small sound from the child shifted the silence again, grounding her even as the world seemed ready to split open at her feet. And in that fragile stillness, The sense that everything was about to unravel took hold. The muffled hum of conversation inside rose and fell, like a tide struggling to reclaim normalcy. Yet the moment outside had drifted far beyond the reach of celebration. He shifted with a restlessness that betrayed the conflict sitting heavy in his chest, revealing an urgency that pressed unspoken questions into the air between them. The tension curled through the space, carrying traces of decisions made under pressure and wounds left to grow in silence. The soft stir of fabric brushed past her as she adjusted her hold, the tiny breath against her shoulder somehow steadying, even as the world strained with uncertainty. Every second seemed to peel back another layer of the past, exposing a truth she sensed was tied not only to him, but to the fragile thread holding the wedding together. And each passing moment made clearer that avoidance was no longer possible. A faint shift in the air signaled movement inside, as though the fragile balance of the day sensed the pull of the moment at the doorway. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor cut through the music, followed by the low murmur of voices tinged with unease, hinting that the disruption had not been forgotten. The weight of expectation pressed down, urging clarity that still hovered out of reach as the moment stretched into something larger than the confrontation that drove her outside. His eyes flickered with hesitation, revealing the cost of distance and the silent truth that returning carried a burden he could no longer escape. The child stirred again, offering a soft reminder of innocence in a world tangled with old missteps. And as the tension deepened, the sense grew that the coming reveal would shake more than just the fragile peace between them. The sudden shift of voices from within sent a ripple of unease across the threshold, blending with the distant sounds of forced laughter as the celebration tried to steady itself. Yet the heaviness between them refused to ease, as though the truth waiting to surface had been building through years of silence and could no longer stay buried beneath polite avoidance. The moment thickened with the weight of memories that neither had dared revisit, creating an unspoken pull they both felt but struggled to face. Her pulse quickened as she sensed that the words he carried were tied to the unrest already spreading inside, threatening to push the day further into chaos. The child's small movement offered a fragile contrast to the storm gathering around them, and as the world quieted again, the feeling grew that the time for holding back had come to an end. The air felt suspended, as though the world itself held its breath while the moment threatened to tip into something irreversible. The music inside dipped again, replaced by a murmur that hinted more guests were beginning to question the absence at the front of the room. The tension along the doorway deepened as unspoken truths pressed harder against the silence, urging a confrontation that could no longer wait. He swallowed, the gesture small yet heavy with meaning, revealing the weight of a decision long delayed and now impossible to avoid. The soft rustle of fabric and the faint shift of the child against her shoulder reminded her that choices made here would echo far beyond the discomfort of the moment. And as the quiet thickened into something almost physical, the sense that the next words spoken would fracture the day became undeniable. A hush drifted through the doorway as the music inside slipped into another forced melody, trying to disguise the uncertainty pulsing beneath the celebration. The air between them tightened as though holding the past in place, refusing to let the truth slip free until both were ready to face it. The faint chatter from the hall carried sharp edges now, hints that questions were beginning to spread among the guests as they sensed the unrest that had already split the day apart. The quiet outside felt heavier, pressing against every unspoken thought that hovered between them while the world waited for the moment to break open. A soft breath from the child steadied her, even as tension curled through her chest, urging her to confront whatever message he had carried back after years away. And as the light shifted across their faces, the sense grew that the truth he held was tied to the heart of the chaos still brewing inside. A tremor of movement echoed from within, the distinct scrape of chairs signaling something had shifted in the ceremony, sending ripples of unease outward. The sound snapped at the tension between them, pushing the moment closer to the reveal she felt him struggling to find words for. The faint breeze caught the edge of her sleeve, reminding her how easily the smallest disturbance could tip the fragile balance holding the day together. His expression tightened as though fighting the pull of regret, revealing that the message he carried was not only painful, but threaded with consequences neither could ignore. The child's soft shift against her shoulder added a grounding warmth that contrasted with the cold dread building in her stomach. And as their silence stretched, the sense deepened that whatever waited to be spoken would strike at the core of the unraveling inside. The distant hum inside dipped again, followed by a soft ripple of voices that rose in confusion, hinting that the absence at the front had begun to draw attention. The air between them thickened with the weight of choices left too long unattended, pushing old memories into the open where neither could avoid them. His breath caught as if held hostage by the pressure of unspoken truth, revealing that his return was tethered to more than simple regret. A sense of urgency pulsed through the space, urging her to prepare for the impact of what he was about to release into a day already teetering on collapse. The child shifted with a faint sigh, creating a fragile moment of stillness that made the tension even sharper. And as the world quieted around them, the warning in the air became impossible to ignore. A sudden burst of laughter from inside struck the moment like a jarring reminder of the celebration they no longer felt connected to, its forced cheer echoing awkwardly against the tension outside. The sound faded quickly, leaving a hollow quiet that made the weight of the impending confession even heavier. His gaze flickered toward the hall as though searching for courage in the direction he had avoided for so long, then returned to her with a depth that revealed the cost of carrying silence. She felt her pulse quicken, aware that the truth he held was tied not only to him but to the fragile foundation of the wedding itself. The breeze brushed across the doorway, lifting the soft fabric around her and adding motion to a moment already trembling on the edge of change. And with each passing second, the pressure to finally speak grew harder to contain. The doorway felt narrower now, as though time itself had tightened around them in anticipation of the moment that would break the silence once and for all. The sounds inside blurred into a low hum, carrying a mix of confusion and forced celebration that hinted the guests sensed something beneath the surface. His shoulders lifted with a slow breath, revealing the exhaustion of someone who had carried a truth far longer than he intended. Her heartbeat quickened as the air thickened with the weight of his unspoken words, and the child's gentle movement made the moment feel even more fragile. Every detail seemed amplified. The shifting light, the distant music, the tension in his stance, creating a sense that the day's unraveling was tied directly to what he was finally ready to reveal. And as he opened his mouth to speak, the world seemed to hold itself still. The world seemed to tighten around the doorway as the weight in his eyes finally shifted, signaling that the truth he had carried for years was ready to surface. The muffled celebration inside rose and fell like a distant echo, unable to mask the tension gathering in the quiet space that held them suspended between past and present. Her breath steadied as she braced for whatever revelation had dragged him back on a day already cracked by conflict. The child stirred with a soft sound, anchoring her even as her pulse raced with dread she couldn't name. His lips parted once, then closed again as hesitation swept through him, revealing how much the confession cost. A tremor of anticipation rippled through her, urging him to speak before the fragile moment broke under its own weight. And with a slow inhale, the truth began to take shape between them. The first words trembled from him, barely louder than the whisper of wind slipping through the doorway, yet strong enough to shift the air between them. The moment froze as she absorbed the meaning hidden beneath his fractured tone, sensing the weight that had lived with him long before this wedding began unraveling. The distant music dipped again, creating a strange stillness that pulled them further from the celebration they once tried to support. His voice faltered as regret tightened his features, pushing the truth closer, even as uncertainty clung to his breath. The quiet around them grew thicker, urging her to remain steady while the past inched toward the surface with jagged edges. A gentle rustle from the child added a fragile warmth that contrasted with the ache building between them, and as the truth pressed forward, The day's earlier outburst began to feel like only the beginning. The confession spilled out in fragments shaped by years of silence, each word carving deeper into the stillness around them as he revealed the strain that had driven him away. Her breath caught as memories shifted with new meaning, exposing hidden fractures in the family she never realized ran so deep. A distant burst of laughter from inside only sharpened the contrast between the celebration and the unraveling occurring at the threshold. His voice wavered as he admitted the truth he should have spoken long before today, revealing a secret that connected directly to the tension simmering beneath the wedding's polished surface. She felt the world tilt under the weight of the realization, understanding that his return was not a coincidence, but the inevitable collision of choices left unresolved. The child's small sigh cut through the heaviness, grounding her in the moment even as everything changed around them. The tension deepened as the full weight of his admission settled between them, unraveling the assumptions she had carried and revealing the quiet burden he had faced alone. The world inside grew louder as the ceremony shifted into uneasy chatter, hinting that the unresolved strain now spread beyond the threshold. His eyes carried a mixture of regret and urgency, shaped by years of distance he could no longer justify. She felt a ripple of disbelief, struggling to absorb the truth that connected his disappearance to the rising turmoil within the family. A breeze brushed past them, stirring the edge of her dress and adding motion to a moment already trembling with consequence. The child rested quietly, offering a fragile reminder of the innocence caught in the middle of a story far older than her. And as the silence stretched, the sense grew that the truth he carried threatened to fracture the day entirely. The confession ended with a quiet finality that lingered in the air, like a weight too heavy to dismiss, and the world around them felt different in the space it left behind. The music inside faltered again, replaced by uncertain murmurs that hinted the celebration was beginning to strain under the pressure of unspoken questions. His shoulders slumped as though releasing years of tension in a single breath, revealing the toll of truths carried too long. She felt her heartbeat steady as clarity settled in, even though the path forward grew more tangled with every passing second. The child shifted softly, grounding her in a moment that felt both fragile and inevitable. The tension around them pulsed with the knowledge that his return was tied not only to regret but to a looming confrontation inside. And as the light dimmed across the threshold, the next choice loomed large. The air pressed heavier as the truth settled between them, reshaping every memory she carried about the family waiting inside. The distant murmur of guests swelled with a note of unease, hinting that the wedding's polished surface was beginning to crack in places no one could ignore. His confession echoed through her thoughts, revealing that the calm she once believed held their family together had always been a fragile illusion. She felt her pulse steady as she tried to piece together what this meant for the chaos already unraveling in the hall. The child's soft breath warmed her shoulder, reminding her that choices now carried consequences beyond past wounds. His expression held a pleading edge, urging her to understand the depth of what he had been forced to hide. And as the doorway filled with shifting light, the sense that the day was moving toward a breaking point grew impossible to ignore. The tension thickened as voices inside rose with sharper edges, signaling that questions were spreading faster than the ceremony could contain them. His admission replayed in her mind, pulling hidden threads that connected his absence to the simmering unrest she'd always sensed but never understood. A faint rustle of fabric brushed past her as the breeze slipped through the doorway, carrying the distant scent of flowers that once felt comforting and now smelled like a reminder of everything pretending to be perfect. His eyes carried the weight of someone bracing for impact, knowing the truth he had revealed would force a reckoning far bigger than the moment they shared. The child shifted gently, adding warmth to a scene trembling with uncertainty, and with the hall's murmur growing louder, it became clear that silence was no longer an option. A sudden swell of voices from the hall snapped through the quiet, carrying a note of alarm that sent a shiver through the threshold. She felt her breath catch as she sensed the shift happening inside, a ripple of panic that hinted the fragile calm was slipping beyond control. He turned slightly toward the noise, revealing the dread etched across his features as if expecting the moment he feared most to finally erupt. The air between them vibrated with urgency, pushing them toward a decision that would drag hidden truths directly into the heart of the celebration. The child's soft sigh brought a fleeting comfort, but even that gentle sound felt swallowed by the tension building around them, and as the world held itself in a delicate balance, it became clear that the storm he warned of was already beginning to break open inside. The noise inside sharpened into a wave of confused voices, as if the crowd had finally sensed that something deeper than a brief disruption had unsettled the day. He stiffened, revealing how closely his fears aligned with the unraveling taking shape beyond the doorway. She felt her heartbeat quicken as she imagined the moment when the truth he carried would collide with the carefully arranged celebration that had already begun to fracture. The light dimmed slightly as a cloud passed overhead, deepening the shadows around them and adding weight to the moment pressing against their shoulders. The child rested quietly, unaware of the storm gathering within steps of her. And as the murmur inside turned sharper, she knew they stood on the edge of a moment that would shift the entire wedding into chaos. The tension inside rose to a breaking point, and a sudden hush washed over the crowd, sending a jolt through the doorway as though the entire hall had paused at once. She felt the shift ripple through the air like a warning, urging them toward a decision they could no longer postpone. His breath came shallow, revealing that the moment he had feared most was unfolding just beyond the arch, pulling the day's fractured truths into the open. The child stirred again, grounding her choices even as dread curled through her chest. Every sound from the hall carried a sense of rising panic, as if the guests were beginning to question not just the outburst, but the deeper void that lay beneath the bride's anger. And as the light spilled unevenly across the threshold, the sense became undeniable. The truth waiting inside was no longer something they could keep to themselves. A sharp ripple of silence burst from the hall, spreading outward like a shock wave that pulled both of them instinctively toward the doorway. She felt the air tighten, as though the building itself braced for collapse, carrying the weight of questions that had finally risen past whispered doubt. His steps faltered, revealing the dread pressing against every breath he took. Knowing the truth he carried was about to collide with a crowd already shaken by the earlier outburst. The child shifted gently against her, adding a soft warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold uncertainty creeping through the moment. The distant voices turned frantic, hinting that someone had noticed more than the bride's anger, and now searched for answers buried in years of silence. And as the doorway filled with trembling light, the sense grew that the family's foundation was seconds away from shattering. The tension inside erupted into a swirl of urgent voices as guests pushed from their seats, driven by confusion that had grown into alarm. She felt her heartbeat pound as the noise reached them, each sound pulling the truth closer to the surface where it could no longer be ignored. His expression tightened with a mixture of fear and resolve, revealing that the moment he had dreaded for years had finally arrived. A faint tremor vibrated through her hands as she steadied the child, knowing they were standing on the edge of a reveal that would change the shape of every relationship inside. The light flickered across the floor as movement rippled through the hall, adding urgency to the tension pressing against their chests. And as the voices rose again, the sense became clear. Whatever had been hidden was now breaking open. A sudden voice cut through the crowd with piercing clarity, rising above the chaos and sending a wave of stillness through the hall. She felt her chest tighten as the silence grew heavy, pulling everyone's attention toward a single point where truth and panic converged. His jaw clenched as he recognized the source of the call, revealing that the person demanding answers now held as much stake in the past as he did. The doorway seemed to draw them forward, as if fate refused to allow them to stay on the edges any longer. The child's soft sigh brushed against her shoulder, grounding her as the world inside hovered on the brink of collapse. And as the silence deepened, the echo of that voice exposed a truth too tangled to hide any longer. The tension reached a sharp peak as the crowd parted just enough to reveal the bride standing rigid at the front, her expression a mixture of fury and fear that cut straight through the remaining noise. She felt her pulse thrum as the bride's gaze locked on the doorway, demanding answers with a desperation that revealed far more than anger over a crying child. He shifted beside her, shoulders tightening as the moment he had avoided for years finally trapped him in its center. The air thickened with the weight of unspoken history, pulling the truth toward the surface in a slow, unstoppable tide. The child stirred again, adding a small warmth that kept her grounded even as the world around them trembled. And as the hall held its breath, the path toward confrontation became inevitable. A crushing stillness filled the hall as they stepped across the threshold, each movement pulling them deeper into the storm that had been building long before the ceremony began. The bride's expression wavered between shock and betrayal as her gaze flicked to the returning figure beside her, revealing that his absence had carved wounds hidden beneath years of silence. She felt the weight of the child in her arms anchor her as the truth pressed forward, shaping a moment that held the power to break or bind the family forever. The guests watched with wide eyes, sensing that the unraveling had reached its final point, and that the secret revealed here would echo long past the wedding day. The air pulsed with anticipation as he drew a breath, poised to speak the confession that would expose everything. And in that fragile pause, the world felt ready to fracture.